Hi, I'm Sean Halsall, and this is What's Left.
When I say, hey, hey, what's wrong with you? I wanna take you back to now just to see you smile. You know I'm gonna be there 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What's Left. You have just got me this week, but joining me is Marlon, who you might remember from the election special, popped on as a guest there, and he's going to talk to us about the last week in France.
Hey,
Hi,
Sean.
Marlon.
How's it going?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How are things for you over there? It's seemed like a very volatile week over in France.
Pretty good. It's exciting. The government has fallen. Michel Barnier, who was prime minister for barely 3 months, is no longer the prime minister. Well, he technically is still the prime minister, but he has to resign. His government was voted down by the rest of the National Assembly. We'll see how long it takes for him to get out. The last time that the government fell after the elections, it hung around for months before Macron appointed a new prime minister. But Macron spoke recently the other day, and he said that he's going to name a prime minister in the coming days. So I don't know if that's going to happen. The hanging around, and first time a prime minister has been voted down in a no confidence vote in I think 62 years. Well, it was 1962 the last time it happened, and one of the shortest governments ever in the history of the Fifth Republic, the modern French political form.
So, what does that tell us about the sort of state of politics? And I think it's broader than just France. I think we're seeing these sort of things happen across the West, certainly Europe at the moment, with governments getting elected and losing confidence very, very quickly. I mean, obviously France is a little different because technically the left won the election at the last elections, but obviously didn't actually get power. So what's happened there?
There's a lot of this sort of where the executive or the ruling class is refusing to recognize the democratic, the democratic consequences, the fact that the democratic will of the people is sovereign. And because they're not, it's causing chaos and instability. They'll say there's a lot of chaos and instability in France because of the political situation, but the chaos and instability comes from the fact that, it's not from the democracy, it's because of a lack of democracy. The parties are voting against, bringing down the government because the government doesn't represent the French people. It's as simple as that. If they wouldn't have got voted down. There wouldn't be 62%. I think it's actually went up now, but something like 68%. But let's say 65. There wouldn't be 65% of the French people saying that they think Macron should resign and hold new elections if they were representing the people. And they say that they're respecting the institutions of the republic and they're respecting democracy by carrying out his term. Macron said when he spoke recently that he wasn't going to step down, despite there being rumors he was going to, because he was elected to a 5-year term. And he's going to stay for the next 30 months, finish out his term. And, the National Assembly is going to look how it looks for at least until the summer, because under the French Constitution, you can only have elections once every 12 months, and they had elections in the summer. So it's going to look like that. And he said they're going to have to work together. I'm going to have to find a prime minister, and you're going to have to like it. We're going to be useful. We need to stop France from, diving into a financial crisis, which he, of course, created.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? These sort of centrists who bang on about being stable and needing that, yet at the very cause of all that is unstable. I mean, we saw it recently in America, the Democrats failing to recognize that maybe people might like their material needs met and being punished for that. And yeah, it's frustrating because us on the left, we see the answers so clearly, that invest in housing, education, healthcare, and you might have a happy populace, rather than messing around with financial instruments and sort of refusing to tax the ultra wealthy and putting that burden back onto the average person on the street. It's it's kind of wild that they can't see that issue and the answers to it. But
Yeah, I mean, I guess the failure of the left is to convince enough people that that's right. And obviously, there's a lot of countervailing winds and propaganda, and this fear mongering before the vote in France that if the government falls, a budget won't be passed. So, civil servants will stop being paid, and your health insurance card isn't going to work anymore. Of course, none of that is true. There'll still be a budget. They'll just roll over the budget from last year. But it all comes in the context of this budget battle, And so, yeah, the budget that Macron and his political allies are putting forward is full of cuts, spending cuts, the exact opposite of what you're describing. There's some tax rises too, which the right claims is the reason why they joined in on this no confidence vote, because of course the reason the government fell is because the National Rally and Marine Le Pen voted for the no confidence vote. There's been a no confidence vote before that the left has voted for, and they don't have enough votes to bring down the government. They only brought down the government because of the National Rally. So the budget does, it doesn't meet those conditions you're putting forward as, helping people, and France is often viewed as sort of a mecca for social policies, lower rents, price controls on some stuff, better education, no cost education, or just perfunctory cost education, more aid to students, but at the same time, it's been diminished a lot over the past, you could even say 4 decades, go back as far as that, and will continue being diminished in all the future budgets, and this budget, 40 million in cuts. And when push comes to shove, the left, the New Popular Front parties, which is this coalition that ran in the elections, composed of the France Insoumise, which is the party of the politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the Socialist Party, the Green Party, other smaller groupsicles, they passed a budget, or they amended a budget during in the commissions in the National Assembly, with all tax rises on the rich, more funding for services, like, for instance, the creation of a bureau to take care of disabled people. Dedicated agents. I think it was 15 billion euros to fund this, which would, of course, improve and just transform tons of people's lives. Mm-hmm. But that's just one example. They passed, and then, of course, the government and the National Rally voted against this budget, which is funny because the budget was proposed by the government, but then just amended. So they voted it down with the amendments. Because the amendments had been passed through some, parliamentary inside baseball, where basically the government wasn't showing up for votes because they knew they weren't going to be able to pass their budget. Yeah. So they just said, whatever, we'll let anything get on it and we'll vote it down, because of parliamentary inside ball, it gets passed ahead by the government, which is why the government came down, because Michel Barnier used this passage in the Constitution, 49.3, where you can pass a bill without Parliament, without the National Assembly, which is what he did, and that's why the no confidence vote was triggered.
So, I mean, just on that, with the sort of that left bloc, how stable is that? Can you see that holding together over the next at least year, maybe more?
No, and it's already fallen apart because of the Socialist Party, which is basically like the Labour Party. And just the other day, Olivier Faure, who's the president of the Socialist Party, announced that he would be accepting the negotiation offers with Macron to form a government. And in the context of that, they said they have no preconditions in the negotiations. Of course, absurd. If anyone from a guy just negotiating a raise to negotiating anything in a row, if you have no conditions in a negotiation, you're going to get fleeced. And
yeah, absolutely.
They said they're going to walk back on the commitment to abolishing the pension reform, which has been the one policy that, despite tensions in the left-wing coalition, it seems they've stayed true on. They've all continuously, since being elected, voted to abolish the retirement reform, which means lowering the retirement age back down to 62 from 64, which Macron passed, and holding strong on that. But basically, they're saying, okay, well, that's up for question now. So it's already broken. There's been tensions for a while. It's not a surprise, but here's the moment. And Macron has made it clear. He says, "I'm not going to appoint any Socialist Party prime minister who's part of a Socialist Party group who's in alliance with LFE, La France Insoumise, Mélenchon's group," which makes it clear that his goal, beyond just appointing a prime minister, is to fracture the coalition. And he knows he can. And, aside from being politically, ridiculous what the Socialist Party is doing, it's just pathetic because they're not even I'm exaggerating because they fundamentally agree with Macron's politics, a lot of them, so they're not going to feel like they're getting played. But if there's anyone in the party who really feels like they need to show responsibility and form a government for the general interest of the French people, well, you're not going to form a government for the general interest of the French people with Emmanuel Macron.
No, absolutely. And I think for me, it's the damage sort of making them deals and jumping in does to the left. I mean, as you said, it's hardly a left-wing party over there, the Socialist Party in France, but it's the long-term damage that does. I mean, we saw it in the UK with the Liberal Democrats forming a coalition with the Conservatives in 2010. And just the damage that does to their sort of electoral chances in the future, it almost wiped them out.
Yeah,
sort of in the next election.
In 2022, the Socialist Party candidate Anne Hidalgo, who's the mayor of Paris, she got 1.7% of the vote. They won the election in 2022 they won a huge majority in 2022, the Socialists. In 2012, the Socialists. So just 10 years later, they've completely been discredited and are continuing to be rightfully discredited. What was I going to say? I forget. I was going to say something, but
no problem. So what is it that makes France so sort of particularly volatile, with whether that be sort of street movements, social sort of uprising when policies get tabled, or politically with sort of the instability we see?
I guess my answer would be, even though France has this reputation for street movements, the real reason I think why there's this political instability is because there is an organized left, and instability is not necessarily a problem. It's a good thing that the government fell. It's a good thing that this budget is not gonna pass. It's a good thing that all of these questions are, at the forefront of the media, at the forefront of, obviously the media is filtering it the way they do,
Yeah.
and downplaying and, portraying the left as just, disseminators of instability. But all these questions are not, they have to be addressed. There's no consensus. There's an artificial consensus, but there's no real consensus. Whereas in some countries, they're not even, you don't even talk about these things. It's self-evident that the market should, rule healthcare. What's happening in labor with the Labour Party right now in Britain with their budget. They're just openly singing the praises of the market, openly singing the praises of, a deportation campaign. Even there's no force in England that opposes that. In not even in a subtle or sensitive way, just in a sort of chauvinistic, complete xenophobic way, and on purpose, even if they don't believe that themselves, because they're just crass, electoralists, but not that there's anything wrong with appealing to people, but so all these questions are debated more. And I think what Jean-Luc Mélenchon did, the politician who I mentioned a couple times now, if you don't know listening who he is, he was a former Socialist Party politician. He was a senator for years, and he left the Socialist Party in the late 2000s because he saw the direction they were going. François Hollande, who became president of France, had won the chairmanship of the Socialist Party, and Mélenchon had supported another candidate against him at a party conference, and when Hollande won, he knew it's over. So he left, he created a party called the Front de Gauche, the Left Front, which was in a coalition with a bunch of small parties and the Communist Party. They ran in 2012, he got 11.1% of the vote. They ran in 2017, he got 19% of the vote. They ran for president. They ran in 2022. He got 22% of the vote. And with him, he brought this movement that now they have 70 deputies in the National Assembly. The last time they had 17. There's going to be municipal elections in 2026. They're targeting to win town halls. And the Front Insoumise isn't a Marxist party, though, of course, everyone involved in it is very conversant with those ideas and comes from those places and believes in a lot of those things. But they seem very radical compared to other parties in other parts of the world. And I think that's a big reason, why there's so much instability, because they do exercise pressure and they have weight. There's an organized movement of the left, which isn't in power, but, it has a say, at least. Now, they got to take power if they want to do anything. But
yeah, and it's looking at the context from Britain, where we see Keir Starmer the most unpopular sort of prime minister within the length of time he's managed to do it. It's almost impressive how quickly he's lost popularity here. But we don't see them trying to address people's needs. Rather, we see them appealing to right-wing talking points, like you said, stuff about deportation, immigration, demonizing people on benefits, the disabled, LGBT people. You see them just play into the right-wing playbook and think that that's going to help you. If you position yourself slightly to the right of where you are, trying to chase right-wing votes, you're going to lose a big portion of your voting coalition. You just cannot accept that sort of policy. But also, you're not going to win the other side because there are much more solid fascist-leaning parties knocking around that the people are already married to. They're not going to trust Labour come 4 or 5 years' time when they've completely dropped the ball on what they're supposed to do, talking about putting money in people's pockets and stuff. I don't understand how they can do that whilst... I mean, I'm just wondering which group of people are going to start trying to starve next to sort of throw people pay rises and stuff around. It's worrying, and it's said earlier, it's a trend we're seeing across probably the world at the moment. It is politics has become much more polarized, and these centrist parties are just flapping around in the middle, making noise, but not actually really changing their approach to policy.
yeah, I think politics has just also shifted much further to the right everywhere. And I think the reason for that is also that the left shifted much further to the right, or the parties of the left. Nobody, like you said, nobody trusts them. Why would you? And I don't think the parties of the right are to be trusted either. But obviously there's a hegemonic propaganda apparatus to convince people that actually they are trustworthy and they are, different on certain questions and that they are looking out for you, which isn't true. I don't believe that's true at all. But what is true is that you can't trust the parties. You can't trust the Socialist Party. You can't trust the Labour Party. You can't trust the Democratic Party. They are not looking out for you. If you, well, depends who you are. But I think most people listening to this, they're not looking out for you. They're not, if you work for a living, if you don't have an extra $100,000 in the bank right now, they're probably not looking out for you. And they're going to betray you, whatever they say. The Socialist Party acted like it was moving back to the left here in France. In 2022, they had a party conference. Their president was this guy, Olivier Faure. He was working with Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He said, too many people view socialist politicians as future traitors or future ministers, basically that they'll fold. Great point, Olivier Faure in 2022. Who should listen is Olivier Faure in 2024, because there he is right now betraying, just making a deal to become a minister in the government. His name is circulating as a possible prime minister. Who knows? And, if you look at the math, it could happen. If the Socialist Party has 60 deputies, the government could avoid a no confidence vote if the Socialist Party in bloc refuses to vote against whoever the next prime minister is. You need 288 votes currently for a no confidence vote. In this current one, there were 320.
Mm.
321 votes. But take out the socialists, 260.
Mm.
They can't bring down the government without the Socialist Party. So if they're negotiating, there could be a socialist supported government. And of course, that government is not going to be popular, but it's going to pass these reforms, this budgets, this balanced budget, you know. So France's debt to GDP ratio is on track to be 6%, which is twice what the European Union allows, 3%. And they say this is, a financial crisis. It's going to stop institutional investment in France. Of course, there's no sign that that's true. If there's financial reporting, there's no sign that investors are going to stop investing in France based on this arbitrary GDP debt to GDP ratio.
Yeah, just going back a bit there. All these parties, like you said, the centrist parties across Europe, they're offering the status quo. And
Right.
I mean, yeah, if you're extremely wealthy, you will have seen your wealth grow over the last 10, 15, 20 years. But for the rest of us, the status quo means every year the screw gets tightened a bit more and it becomes a bit harder to keep yourself alive and stop yourself falling through the cracks. No one wants the status quo. We need transformative change. And whilst the left can't seem to be able to communicate that or to actually get themselves together and offer it properly, we're going to see right-wing and nefarious sort of organisations taking the sort of benefits from that. So talk about what's going on with the far right in France with Marine Le Pen and what's happened with her sort of gang over the last week or so.
Yeah, so she brought down the government, it's fair to say, despite the fact that, like I said earlier, that the left voted for this no confidence measure, wouldn't have passed without her. And it came at the end of this budget negotiation process where Le Pen was presenting herself as the defender of the French people in a lot of ways. And a lot of the policies, concessions she was extracting for the government are good things. She opposed the lowering the reimbursement rate for prescription medication. That was going to be in the new budget. It was something like 65 to 60%. So you'd have to pay more out of pocket when you get medication. And the government backed down on that and named her as the reason. She opposed de-indexing pensions from inflation. They were going to de-index the pensions from inflation in this budget, lowering pensions. For people who can't exactly make more. It's not like you can just make more money. That's what you have. You have your pension, and there's no way for you to hedge against inflation. And the government didn't back down on that one, so that was their red line. That's why they, were going to go ahead and try to pass it anyway. She opposed a new tax rise on electricity. The cost of electricity would have went up for the consumer, of course, and they backed down on that. At the same time, she had a couple other red lines, which, I don't think are good at all. But she said, no more medical aid to undocumented immigrants, which, as the left made the point of it extensively in France, aside from the morality of that, if people are getting infectious diseases and etc., it's not good. You just got to nip that in the bud, provide the medical aid.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad for public health to not just make sure everyone in the country is healthy. And then she also wanted she wanted drastic cuts to that budget, which the government agreed on. And she also wanted a new immigration law, which there was an immigration law passed in 2023, which was already, extremely rigid, and which Marine Le Pen called an ideological victory for our movement. But apparently it's not enough of one. And that's because I guess some of the measures were struck down by the Constitutional Court after the bill was passed. So she would want those measures back in, such as, increasing the amount of time you need to be in France to apply for citizenship, or increasing the amount of time you need to be in France to qualify for any benefits, or, students not being able to access certain benefits, international students, etc., etc. So at the same time as she's, presenting herself in a good way. You know, she's a politician and she's a good politician. A lot of people are going to look at her and say, well, Marine Le Pen saved the pension. She got rid of the tax on electricity. She kept the price of medication low. She's like, has a social program. But at the same time, you know, she voted with the government to defeat that budget by the left with the amendments, you know, increasing taxes on the rich, putting more money into social programs. So what she's doing now, I think, is trying to, you know, obviously trying to take power. She wants Macron to step down. She wants new elections. She has a court case because of embezzlement when she was in the EU Parliament, and she's understandably worried about that because one of the penalties could be ineligibility for 5 years. So she doesn't want to wait around until 2027. She wants elections as soon as possible.
So how much impact does the EU have on the way French people see that institution? I mean, I know sort of we had that argument and debate in Britain back in 2015, but how much is that impacting on the way people feel about these sort of neoliberal politicians?
I know, we know one thing, the National Rally is also, they want to reduce France's contribution to the EU budget. But I think the perception, even if the perception of the EU hasn't changed a ton, I think more people sort of accept the EU as a reality because they saw and they perceived, rightly or wrongly, I don't know what you can say the lesson of Brexit is, but that they didn't like what they saw. So I don't think there's really a movement to leave the EU in the same way. There's more of this movement to change the EU from all sides, and including the far right, you know, which now has more power than ever in the EU. Giorgia Meloni is hugely influential in EU. The Prime Minister of Italy, the fascist Prime Minister of Italy, basically, and Ursula von der Leyen, who's the EU Commissioner, is a key ally of Giorgia Meloni. And their parliamentary group, the EU parliamentary group, the strongest EU parliamentary group, includes the National Rally as deputies. They did very well at the EU elections, and they want to use the EU to, you know, crack down on the borders. There's an EU deputy now, Fabrice Leggeri, for the National Rally, who ran this summer and was elected on the list. And his previous job, he was the director of Frontex, which is the border patrol agency in the European Union. And despite, you know, sort of being forced out in murky circumstances where he was supposedly pushing migrants back out into the sea, which is documented, he would turn off the drones that were supposed to observe, you know, encounters, and this would happen, allegedly. There's a report that indicates that that did happen, but despite that, he said, you know, the EU is not letting me do my job. The border controls in the EU are nothing, so that's why I need to become a politician. So there's this movement in the far right, too, to sort of take over the EU. And I think a lot of people who view the EU, maybe who are on the left or liberal, are not going to like what's coming because the political shift involved in the European Union, and they say the European Union is this guarantor of, you know, human rights and social rights and, you know, a bulwark against these forces. But it's also, despite the criticism of the EU, there is democracy in the EU, and if these forces are elected, they will use the institutions of the EU undemocratically because the EU is also undemocratic. And they'll push through everything that these people thought the EU was supposed to defend.
Yeah, I have that debate quite a bit. People saying, "Oh, we should have stayed and reformed." I'm like, that's fine. Fine if you think that is the position, but look around the rest of Europe. Look at who countries are standing. You probably will see a reform of the EU in the next decade, but it certainly isn't going to be from a left-wing perspective. It's far right being elected in many places, and also this idea that the EU is this great protector of sort of social legislation and workers' protections, and particularly we heard a lot here.
Right.
I would challenge anyone to point to me any anti-trade union legislation that came in the UK that wasn't in our time in the EU. So it certainly didn't do our working movement, the trade union movement, any favours over the few years. I mean, joined the EU in '74. Thatcher elected in 79, and then just the next 20, 30 years of anti-trade union legislation, strangling the rights of workers to be able to fight for fair pay and conditions and all that.
Yeah, the EU has a commitment to the market. It's, in their founding documents, it's law. You can't, they always try to refute this and say, oh, well, you can have nationalized companies in the EU because there are plenty of countries in the EU that have nationalized companies. But you can keep your nationalized companies, but you can't renationalize under the EU. You can't do it. It's against their anti-competitive. It's anti-competitive. So there's
Yeah,
no
and
prospect of
a lot of the
renationalization.
a lot of the companies they point to when they say about nationalized industry, they're not really nationalized. It's publicly owned, but not
Yeah,
real nationalization. It's
definitely. And then they have their budgetary rules. You can't deficit spend more than 3% of GDP, which, by the way, is I mentioned it's an arbitrary number. I talked with an economist, Eric Burr, when I was writing an article in 2022 about Marine Le Pen and the pension reform, and I asked about this rule, and I was like, "Where does this rule come from?" And he said, "Well, when François Mitterrand was president, and this was after he'd sort of broken with his communist allies and took a neoliberal turn, he was talking with his advisors, and the National Assembly kept trying to vote these budgets that included more spending, and he wanted to be more fiscally disciplined. And he was like, how can I do that? How can I have an excuse to do that? And they came up with this 3% debt to GDP ratio. It's not based on anything scientific. It's not based on any principle, even of economics. It's just he wanted to point, oh, well, we can't do more than 3% of GDP spending because I don't want the National Assembly passing all these budgets. And then they sort of enshrined it in the EU norms from there because he pursued EU integration. Mitterrand.
okay.
So there's nothing behind it. It's fake.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and yeah, it's again, it only serves these big companies to. Yeah, it doesn't even serve them, to be honest. Long term, we've got people. If you've got people just wandering around your country without spare money to spend, then they're probably not going to be buying the nonsense you're creating.
Right, even if you want a market economy, which
Yeah,
the
it's
jury's out on that. Yeah, but
absolutely. So what do you feel is next in the immediate future in France for the next 2 to 3 months? What do you think we can expect to see?
I wouldn't be surprised if the socialists do negotiate with Macron and name a new prime minister. I don't think Macron's going to resign at this point. Yeah, there's going to be deadlock. I'd be surprised. I haven't talked to people in the Socialist Party yet, so I'm going to qualify that. I might do that next week, try to see how they're going to vote. But I wouldn't be surprised, knowing their history, if they did betray everyone. It'd be a great surprise if, 22 brave socialist deputies, that's all you need to break ranks. You'll get reelected if you do it. You know what I mean? People will take notice. Nobody likes Macron. Nobody wants a government with Macron. So if you 22 socialist deputies want to vote against the government and keep bringing the government down, well, I don't know if you're listening, but if you are, do it. But I think that's likely what's going to happen, and that government might be able to limp along. They'll pass a budget, maybe with a couple of concessions to the left, where the Socialist Party can say, look, we're the responsible left-wing politicians. You never would have got this if it wasn't for us. So you better thank us, for these minor concessions. And then within a year, next summer, I think there's going to be new legislative elections.
Yeah, that's the next question. Sort of like a year to a couple of years time. Do you see those, if the Socialist Party make that deal? Do you see them being punished at the next election? And do you think it will be the left or the rights that benefit from that? And is there any sort of way we can shore up the left's position there? Because the last one we need is another fascist in Europe.
I mean, La France Insoumise is already condemning them. They're opposed to them. Hopefully they can, some people will definitely move over to LFE. The problem is they ran the last election sort of as a coalition, so they stood unique candidates. But if they start splitting candidates, which they should, it's the politically correct thing to do for the LFE. You can't run with these betrayers. And I bet the Socialist Party, if they make a deal, is going to have to disavow LFE to get into government. So there's going to be a lot of split candidacies. And I bet, I wouldn't be surprised if it did redound to the benefit of the National Rally. I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to form a government. I do think it's inevitable or a matter of time before they get in.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting because Macron has sort of consistently seemed to have been hated for years now, and how is he holding on? How has he managed to get elected again for a second term? But how is this?
I think until recently, the National Rally was more hated than him. So he always had himself run against the National Rally. I just don't think people are going to go for that anymore. The left has voted against the far right, but they may just stop voting. They got nothing from it. You could say it stopped the far right from coming into power, but Macron is a centrist or a moderate, people say, though I don't think he is. I think he's actually quite a reactionary conservative. But even if he's politically a centrist or a moderate, he's not temperamentally a centrist or a moderate. He believes in his authority. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't believe in building a coalition in the National Assembly, really, that, a coalition in the real sense that has different interests being represented. He wants to impose his program and ideology on the entire country, the entire National Assembly. He doesn't respect the National Assembly. He doesn't respect democracy, really. He'll point out, well, I've been elected, so I respect. What do you mean? I respect democracy. I've been elected. Well, yeah, but you've been elected in a two-round system where it's more your opponent who's been rejected. You represent a bloc of France, which is about a large bloc, a 30% bloc of France, which the bourgeois bloc of France, and they support you, and you've only been elected because people don't want the far right in. And eventually he might, they're going to run out of runway, but he can't run next election, so he's fine.
So that's another interesting thing. I heard if he was to resign, he would be able to run again.
He wouldn't, or he would?
He would.
Yeah.
I heard if he resigns during this term, he would be able to run again. So do you think that he might be kicking us down the road to have it happen again in a year's time and then potentially give himself another term?
It's a controversial constitutional question. I think he would be able to run again. He also would be able to run in 2032, even if he served out his full term. There's not a 2-term limit. It's a 2 consecutive term limit. I'm not sure about his motivations less and less. They're harder for me to discern than I think I used to think. I wasn't expecting him to dissolve Parliament, the National Assembly. That doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm less confident of saying what he'll do now. And I hear less about what he's going to do now. I think he's more, what would you say? He's hidden himself away in the presidential palace, and you don't hear as much about what his plans are, talking to people. That is like a rumor, too, though, that's been going around for years. I've heard that rumor. I've heard that rumor from, not just I've read it, but I've also heard it from people who have an idea, though not from him, not people who've talked to him about it. It's a persistent rumor, and it was a persistent rumor that the National Assembly was going to be dissolved, which I wasn't sure I believed either. So we'll see. I'm starting to feel like it's not going to happen for 2027, but he could always run again for 2032. And, François Hollande, who's a former president, is now a deputy in the Socialist Party. He ran in the latest elections. There's always a path for Macron.
So, if you had the ear of the French left's leadership, what sort of stuff would you want to see from them over the next year or two?
I like what La France Insoumise is doing. I think Mélenchon is extremely, not just ideologically, interesting, but extremely competent politician. Unlike in a lot of other countries, I think, I'd point to that difference. They're very organized. They're constantly producing reactions to everything. They have all their deputies are, tireless. They're constantly imposing themselves in the debates of the country. They're constantly passing or trying to pass measures in the commissions. They're constantly, they are constantly organizing all the time, people. And I don't really have advice for them because I think I think they more have advice for other people. They just, I don't know, they need to win. I don't know how they win. I don't know the answer to that because they haven't won yet. As much as I praise them, they haven't won, you know, and I don't know how they win. But I would say, you know, and I don't think they would be, but don't be tempted by power like the Socialist Party. I don't think they will. They haven't been, but continue not being so.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of lessons that different left movements around the world can learn there. So what could we in Britain learn from the LFE there in France?
To move faster, there's all these things about forming a new left-wing party. Do it, you know, do it. Run in elections right away, and just indefatigable. You know, you have to. Don't wait for Jeremy Corbyn. You know, don't wait for anyone else. You just have to start doing it. You know, there's like, it's not incredibly difficult to get attention nowadays. You know, and political journalists are always looking for stories. You can immediately get a lot of attention. People who are constantly doing things are constantly in the news. It's an attention economy. If a left-wing party is announced and if they win anything, they're going to get attention right away. And then there's obviously just the day-to-day work of getting people to, you know, which you know about more than me. I know a little bit about the media, but you know more about that. But yeah, just move faster. Move faster. Stop waiting. There should have been a new party in 2019, you know?
Yeah.
It's been almost 6 years. I'd say get with the program. Make the break. Go for it.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, entirely. We saw a group of people run as independents on the left in Britain, which isn't usually when you see an independent in the UK. It's a Tory who wouldn't get elected as a Tory in the area they want to run. So it was sort of breaking with that. But I think there is concerted efforts going on now and we've had a few guests on talking about that over the last couple of months. But to build a sort of mass credible party to the left of Labour in the UK, and I mean, we say it should have been formed in 2019. I'd probably argue 1997 was probably about the right time.
No, you're right. Yeah, I'm just talking about in my memory. Yeah.
But yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, and we see this echoed across the world. I mean, it's something that America could do with massively. The United States of America. I mean, obviously, south of the border, there's plenty of left-wing options.
Yeah,
but
we're in
it does feel. I mean, I know us on the left always bang on about the sort of end of capitalism, but it does feel like we're in the sort of final death rolls of this neoliberal thing at the moment, and it's going to go one way or the other.
Oh yeah, and it's going to go one way unless you make it go another. Sorry, my computer's dying, and for some reason it's not charging. Let me just. I might have to move, or else it's going to die.
No. Just before we wrap up, Marlon, just talk a bit about your podcast. Go on, you introduce your podcast.
It's Flap 24, the French Legislative Assembly podcast for 2024. I do it with Ollie Haynes, who's a journalist in Britain. We cover French politics very in depth, you know, if you want to go into like the parliamentary stuff and all the personalities involved and everything that's happening. At times we've done it daily. At one point I did 100 straight episodes. We've done it less daily recently, but because of everything going on now, we're getting back to quasi-daily. We also do like interviews with people, you know, French politicians. We have had interviews with, LFE politicians, etc. We want to get Macron on. We'll get him on one day. He speaks English, so. But yeah, go there, Flap 24. Flap 24 now, because now it's Assemblies. The French Legislative Assembly podcast for 2024. It says it's going to die unless I plug it in right now.
Well, we'll wrap up now, Marlon, just in case we lose you. But it's been a pleasure having you on, and yeah, no doubt we'll have you on again soon. And it seems like you'll end up becoming our French politics correspondent, comrade.
Well, I'd be happy to, yeah. Anytime.
Excellent.
And I'll make sure that the battery's not dying next time.
Perfect. Well, thank you for all listeners, and thanks again, Marlon. Take care, and we'll see you soon.